see you today. And I think we have a very interesting program for you. The "we" here is the Amnesty Club of the Monterey Institute. And I'm really thankful to them, Dorina and Alessandro here, and Stephanie and Eric somewhere. Okay, they've really done a lot of work on this. This is their baby. And I'm really, really proud of them. And so pleased, as always, that our congressman is happy to spend time with us, seems to be. You know, when people ask me what keeps me here on the Central Coast, a no-brainer, right? I tell them it's the quality of our political representation, of course, because otherwise, without it, we wouldn't have, or probably wouldn't be able to enjoy the wonders of nature that we have here. And the wonderful, rich tapestry of cultures and the congeniality of our community. It makes a lot of difference to have the representation that keeps that sustains that quality of life. Our congressman is a miracle maker. I know a lot of you know that. He turned a fragile coastline into a sea life sanctuary and a military base into a university. You know, I've been hearing people talk lately about a scarcity of water, and what I strongly suspect is that he's turning it into wine. Anyway, he's been taking very good care of us for such a long time now. He got his start in 1975 working with local government, elected to the Board of Supervisors and then to the State Assembly. And then since '93, he's been representing us in Congress. And we've been able to count on him to oppose stupid wars and repressive legislation like the Patriot Act, and polluted environments and polluted elections, and to support healthy habitats and vulnerable people. And one of the things that you may not know about Sam is that he has been commuting, most of the time he's been in D.C., commuting back here every weekend. I'm amazed at just the energy to do that. The more I travel, the less I want to fly, you know. So, and I know he doesn't do that for political reasons. He gets re-elected every couple of years with a margin that just smashes any opposition. So I have to imagine that, you know, his wife Sherry and daughter Jessica and the grandchildren had something to do with this kind of travel. But I do also get the inclination, the idea that this is really his community. I mean, I lived in D.C. for a dozen years, and on Capitol Hill particularly. Most members of Congress are not like that. I guess they all have communities somewhere, but he has really managed to stay absolutely a member of this community, and he comes back to get our ideas, to listen to us, and to keep us informed on what's going on. And I hope you understand what a treat that is. Anyway, his connection with the Monterey Institute goes back a long way. He was trained in Spanish here, and so he's one of our alumni. And his father also, whom I adored, was a state senator for many years, but he was also a member of our board of trustees. And, you know, a very cherished member at that. His association with Latin America goes even farther back. He was one of the early Peace Corps volunteers in Colombia, and he stayed very closely attached to Latin America, very much interested in all events there ever since, but he has had a special attachment to Cuba. And I don't imagine for a minute that it started with me, but I'm very pleased that in 2003 or 4, you probably remember better than I do, I took him with me and with some of my students to inaugurate a new city sister region program with a part of Cuba on the southern coast called Guaymas. It was a beautiful coast and a little bit warmer than ours. And so I think we're going to be working on coming up with some ways to make it possible for even more of you to visit such wonderful places. And so we're going to have an interview tonight. I'll be interviewing Sam with some questions drawn up by the Amnesty Club, particularly Alessandro. I will have simplified them a bit, maybe let's say translated them into Tennessean, but I think Sam will understand. And then we will have questions from the audience that will be collected, right, and delivered to us on stage. So with that, I'll join Sam and see if he wants to have a few words before we start the interview.
Jan, thank you for that very personal introduction, and thank you all for coming. I think Jan set it up. I feel very much like a local person who just happens to have this extraordinary title of member of Congress. But I grew up here, and everything I've ever experienced in my life all relates to the foundation that I got here, and family and friends and area. My mother always said when I grew up that you've got to leave. You can't stay here at Carmel. The world isn't like this. I didn't know that every kid after school didn't go to the beach and just play on beaches. But my first experience of cross-cultural experience was in high school, and between my junior and senior year when I applied to be an American field student. I didn't get accepted, but my mother was in a great books club, and Milton Mayer was a renowned writer, lecturer, Quaker, wrote for Nation magazine, said there are other ways in which kids can travel and experience Europe through international peace camps that Quakers, Mennonites, Brethren, faiths were promoting after World War II to try to get cross-cultural experience with high school age kids. And so 5 of us from Carmel went to different places in Germany and Austria for a month each. And then ended up, we were at different places, but we ended up in Salzburg, Austria, where the mayors picked us up and drove us through Europe. I remember I spent a month in Europe and spent $43. But I came back to Carmel just excited about wanting to see the world and learn languages. Not the languages I was studying in school, obviously, from the grades I got. But I took a job in the Merchant Marine in college, and I took a job in a factory in Buenos Aires. My cousin had the Johnson Wax franchise. So all of this traveling opened my eyes to wanting to do more. Not knowing when I got out of college exactly what I want to do. I thought I'd come back and be the biology teacher that I loved at Carmel High School. I decided I better go out and do something more constructive, paying back, and joined the Peace Corps. And that was, this experience changed my life. I think of particularly this school, because before I went into the Peace Corps, my mother said, you better learn some Spanish, because you certainly haven't been doing very well in your German in college and Latin in high school. And I was motivated to learn the language, and I just took a semester. And so if you want to be called an alumnus of MIIS, either get a title or only have to spend a semester here. I took an entry-level class in Spanish. Peace Corps was, you know, all the right things at the right time, right place. Sent to Colombia. I actually chose that country because when I went down to Argentina, we flew down going to every capital, there's Puddle Hub. And I was going through Bogota, I just love the green and the altiplano of Bogota, so I applied to go to Colombia and was chosen. And then went to a city I'd never heard of called Medellin. And it was a big city before drugs. And that experience of living in a barrio without water, without lights, not all the barrio, but we were right on the cusp. We didn't have any water and lights when I went with a Peace Corps partner, but we were able to get it contraband. The neighbors just went out and said, you need some electricity. And the next thing you knew, we had wires in our house. Barely enough energy to light a light bulb. And then they went out and got contraband water. There was a big pipeline going right through the barrio that went down to downtown Medellin, and they just tapped into that at night and stole water. Everything contraband was stolen. But living in that culture of poverty was probably the greatest learning period for me, because it really taught me how to listen to people who don't have the same values and culture that you have, and not to project those things. So I think Peace Corps made me a very good listener, obviously in another language. And so when I got back to the United States and I was wondering what I was going to do, we were having a war on poverty in America. And I realized in Colombia, I was very involved in sort of petitioning the municipal government to help the barrios of the people, really poor people in the valley. But I had no ability to be involved in their politics. I was not a citizen of that country and really weren't allowed to be political. So I wanted to come back and petition my government. And we were in the middle of the Vietnam War, and so I ended up protesting the war and doing things like that. But when I got into Congress, and I've sort of kept my friends in Colombia, this is all the background for Cuba. When I got into Congress, one of my friends said, you know, while you're in Congress, you have the privilege of doing all this foreign policy, and you ought to find a country that you like and just sort of embrace it. And I thought, well, there'll be a lot of Latinos in Congress. They'll like Latin America. And I was really surprised as I met members of the Latino caucus. They were from their ancestors were from Mexico, Puerto Rico, and Cuba. And that was it. And none of them, the Cubans, which were not interested in Cuba, they were interested in making sure that the Cold War with Cuba got colder. Their parents had been through the revolution, and this is, I mean, so fundamental to understand Cuba is to really understand how this country was so divided. And when Castro won that revolution and the socialist government came in, they took over all private property. So you wanted to stay in the government then, or want to stay in the country, you could stay in your big house, but you could only stay in one room, because the rest of the rooms were going to other people that didn't have housing. You didn't own your business, you could stay there and work for the government running your business, but you couldn't make get your own salary and profit. You'd be working for the government. And those who fled have been very bitter about that ever since and raised their children to think so equally. Having a much harder time to do that for their grandchildren, who have all been born in the United States and raised and know they have relatives in Cuba. I'm sort of curious. I want to go back and I want to see my ancestors. I want to meet the people that never came to this country. So that sort of divided world, and it's interesting, just a side note on that, is that the people who came were not poor people. They were part of the revolution, and they were the beneficiaries of the revolution. And certainly, they weren't black. And so the really poorest population in Cuba, the Afro-Cubanos, never had a chance to escape, like the educated and elites. And they're a little resentful now that the Cuban Americans want to come back, have the money, have made it very successful, and sort of be involved in the development of Cuba when they're not getting the remittances because they don't have relatives in the United States. So there's a real kind of class warfare or disparity here between those that fled, came back. So let's, I'll just wander on. I've been to Cuba 6 times, or 7 times, and I've been to all different parts. I've always gone as a sort of member of Congress, but not on an official diplomatic mission, never been on one of those. I'm not sure we even had any because we don't have diplomatic relations with Cuba. And I've gone with nonprofits that are in Washington, and there is a nonprofit that is funded for the primary purpose of taking people in official positions to Cuba to meet likewise official persons. And I've gone on those almost all the time, so the arrangements have all been made by a nonprofit organization under the license that they have. So let's get into what you think might be the questions, and I can reflect on some of those things. By the way, I might ask Jonathan to say something. Jonathan's show is here, front row. He's written a book, Cuba Rising, and I guess he just spoke to the World Affairs Council. He's been to Cuba over 100 times. He is the expert on Cuban-American relations and Cuban-American travel and everything else, and he's sitting right down there in the front row, so you may want to chat with him tonight.
Yeah, this is working now. Yes, Jonathan, by all means, we will want to have you back here to speak too, especially before we take another group to Cuba. Now, for the first question, I've modified it a little bit from the way it was written up, but I'm just wondering how big a deal you see this policy change as. Is it a Joe Biden level kind of deal, or is it a less dramatic level?
You mean, is it a big effing deal?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's huge. It's absolutely I mean, the reason people have been going to Cuba in Congress, the Cuban Americans won't go. They won't have anything to do with this government. And we've had 2 brothers serving in Cuba. There's only one now serving, the Diaz-Balards. Their aunt was married to Fidel Castro and divorced from Fidel Castro, and they talk about, and what we love to do is go back when they're in the floor usually, because they're very angry. They're very angry brothers. One of them is still a member of Congress, and but very angry. And so I would always go up and say, you know, your cousin, President Castro, wanted you to have this Cubana cigar. So he would cigar. And he would, hey, don't you, he's not the president, he's a dictator, he's an evil man. Get that cigar away from me. I just always hoped that was captured on camera. I always tried to do it when he was, you know, presenting something on the floor. But Our whole efforts and all the time was to come back and petition our own government to try to just incrementally improve relations, to allow people to go, more people to go, exchanges. And we did, I mean, we had some effect because the Cuban intersection there, which is, we don't have diplomatic relationships, but we can have an office there. And the Cubans have an office in Washington, D.C., but under these sort of agreements is that we will not allow their Cuban representatives, their diplomats, to leave Washington, the greater Washington area. They can't go anywhere else in the United States. And in turn, Cuba won't allow our folks to leave greater Havana. So it's been very restrictive in what the embassy offices are right on the Malecón. It's in a beautiful section of town. And we ended up, our government ended up, under George Bush, building a great big billboard, an electronic billboard there, always advertising anything against their government, which really ticked them off. So they built a huge flag park. So the flags you couldn't see the billboard because of all the flags waving. And we finally we just said, look at it, this is just in their face. This is so outrageous. If we're going to really try to have any kind of dialogue with the Cuban government, you got to tear down that electronic billboard. Barbara Lee from Oakland was able to really insist upon getting it torn down. And so when Barack Obama first came into office, and by the way, his election, which was, people don't realize it, but see, he ventured out in the campaign saying that he would like to improve relations with Cuba. Now, what I've learned in Washington and seen is that all these years, since 1969, we've not really had a policy about how we're going to handle Cuba. We've had a policy about how you get elected president of the United States. So our policy has been not about Cuba, it's been about Florida. And it's, if you have to be against the Castro regime, against communism, you don't want to talk about it at all. Barack Obama was the first candidate running for president who said, I'd like to see if we can make some improvements. And guess what? Despite all the political pundits, he won Florida. And that was a tipping point, which just gave the signal that politics, that this hardline embargo had now had a crack in it. And then there's, constantly the universities in Florida are monitoring all the situations and doing polling all the time, and found that there's a tipping point in the polling where the Cuban Americans now, so particularly the millennials, are all saying, I want to go back. I want normalized. Dad, mom, grandpa, get over. You're not getting your house back. You're not getting your business back. But can't we go and start having some relationships with our cousins, and wouldn't it be interesting to see the country of our heritage? So those have been warming trends, and for Obama to announce, and we knew some negotiations because it was all about releasing Alan Gross. By the way, I went and visited him in his jail cell because he was jailed in a military hospital, and he wasn't locked up in a cell although he bunked with other people, and he couldn't stand his captivity there, and he was mad at our government for letting him down. He was mad at the Cuban government for the way they treated him. I heard that and you could only go see him if he wanted to see you. And see, everybody who's a politician wants to go to Cuba and see Alan Gross. Well, the Cuban government won't allow him to, they won't allow everybody, and he doesn't want to see everybody. But he did want to see our delegation. So, and I heard that he wanted some salami. So I went to the Eastern Market and bought all kinds of salami and took it to. So now when he came to the swearing-in ceremony, it was just absolutely shocking to see him. I saw him in his jail cell, in his hospital cell, and then to see him sitting in the gallery of the House of Representatives the day we all got sworn in. And he always refers to me as salami man. So he said, I remember that salami every bite. But I never thought that we'd get to that, because we had the Cuban 5 who we jailed, 2 of whom had served their sentence and returned to Cuba as heroes, and 3 more, one of whom had a lifetime conviction. And as much as we pleaded with our government to try to make some inroads in this, there was just no movement whatsoever, and therefore no movement on Alan Gross. And so when the president announced that not only was Alan Gross, and the Cubans announced that Alan Gross was coming home, and that we were returning all 3 of the Cubans who were in federal prison, and we also, I guess, took another prisoner that nobody had known about because he was undercover when he was arrested and remained undercover throughout his sentencing, and so he came back, and and to say that we're going to restore diplomatic relations, we're going to restore banking, because you cannot, when Americans going to Cuba, you go in no official capacity. You cannot have a credit card. You can't use credit cards. We don't have any banking. We don't have any relations. We have no treaties, no banking treaties, no, if you don't go on a commercial airline, there's no airline treaties, there's no commercial aviation. You go on a chartered flight. So you're sort of just lent this ability to go for a number of days to do your thing in Cuba, but in the other way, that's legally, and then the other way that so many Americans went, where illegally, they'd go to the Caribbean or to Mexico and just say, let's go spend a couple of days in Cuba, and we won't tell anybody. We went to Mexico for a vacation, and we don't tell them that we flew over to Cuba or Caribbean islands. For a while, Customs was looking for people that, you'd come back and say you'd gone to Montreal for the winter, and you came back with a good tan, and you opened up your suitcases full of Cuban rum and cigars, and they realized, you're not in Montreal. And I've had friends who were actually fined for bringing those things back. So, what was the question?
I think you answered it in a very fulsome way. Wasn't it a big deal? And I think, yes, indeed, it was a big deal. Well, a little follow-up to that. Then the next question was to be about specifics. You mentioned diplomatic status and opening in that sense, which is very important. Do you see other specific outcomes of this opening?
Well, everything. If you normalize relations, you normalize everything. You normalize travel, you normalize trade. But see, we have a law. This is the problem. There's this big dark cloud over all these negotiations. That is the law that we adopted when President Clinton was in office. Why he ever signed that bill, it shocked me. But we enacted in very, how to turn these things. Crazy thing, you gotta dial in a code in order to turn it off. Government issued BlackBerry. So we've had this Helms-Burton law and I think it should have sunsetted because neither Helms or Burton are still in Congress, and maybe when they left we should just let the law no longer exist, but it does not allow our president to do all of these things, normalize trade relations and so on. So he can only use the powers that his executive authority, which are, for treaty purposes, can negotiate. And then we're negotiating in, hopefully, Congress, and we can talk about that, because we haven't had the votes in Congress to be able to lift the embargo, or to, and now the question is, when we come back and have to authorize some of this and authorize money to be spent, and that's where Congress has all the power, the Cuban Americans and the Cuban American sympathizers in Congress, and they're a minority, but they're in senior positions in key committees, and they can use that seniority and authorities that they have to block bills, to delay them, not send them for hearings, restrict which if the State Department has specified money to be spent to normalize relations, for example, and to open up reopen up our embassy, there's gonna have to be some funds spent for equipment and so on. They can block that by saying no funds shall be spent for that purpose. And when that's part of the entire appropriations for the whole United States of America, it's not something the president would veto because everything else goes down with it. So it's not, it doesn't have the weight enough to be vetoed.
Okay. I think you're already into an answer of the next question, which was to be, what is the political discourse around this decision? You know, everybody has an angle on it. How will they use it?
Last weekend you watched the NCAA playoffs. Well, this weekend watch the Summit of Americas. That starts, I'm leaving tomorrow night to go to Panama, where all 35 presidents of the Western Hemisphere will be meeting. For the first time, Cuba will be coming. Cuba is not a member of the Organization of American States, which all the rest of us are, and hasn't been able to be invited in the past because of America's influence on that. But now that President Obama has lifted all that, for the first time, you will see President Obama meeting Raul Castro, and I'm sure that'll be the photograph of the weekend news. But you're also going to have dissidents showing up in Panama, forming a kind of a mock other summit of the people that don't like socialist governments in Latin America, doing their demonstrations and having. President Obama has asked, and I think the Cuban people have asked, to have these dialogues so that it's not just all this president's meeting. And I've been to the summits in the past. It's quite impressive. It's a big boardroom, and everybody there is a president of the country. And everybody gets to say something for 10 or 15 minutes. And in the past, when I've been there, it's all the other countries of this hemisphere blasting the President of the United States, whoever that president be, for not softening or removing the embargoes on Cuba, saying, you know, it's the missing child in this hemispheric family, and you've got to invite them in. Well, now it's happening. So I think you're going to see, because the media will cover it, and obviously they're like protesters, so they'll, whatever time they give to the presidents and the seriousness of their dialogue on human rights issues, which is the theme of the human rights, it will be countered with some demonstrations. But I don't think they're going to be able to disrupt the joy that the entire hemisphere has, that the United States finally has lifted its unwillingness to deal with Cuba. We're the only country in the hemisphere that doesn't have normal relationships with Cuba, till now.
All right. What do you see as some of the possible threats or disadvantages from this opening?
I don't see any. I mean, I think Cuba is a fascinating country. You know, it's an island country. It's the biggest island in the Caribbean. It's almost about 900 miles long, about almost 1,000 miles long. All surrounded coastline. I mean, just everything that California has could be lent there to, for example, they don't have any governance on coastline protection. I'm sure that in their, the government owns all the land, but their ability to allow people to farm it and some things like that to protect it. I mean, what I worry about, I think every American who's ever gone to Cuba, is what happens when all this American shopping center, Starbucks, McDonald's, fast food franchises gets to this country and just takes all this incredibly preserved, every inch of the country is historical preservation, because nobody's had any money to do anything. Now, Old Havana, his government sees the value in it through tourism and has been investing in restoration. But the whole city needs to be restored. Every city in every place needs. Some of the rural towns that have been allowed to rent out rooms to tourists They've been fixing those up and make, but they're really gonna need a lot of, they're gonna need a lot of planning and a lot of traffic issues. They're gonna have to deal with those. I see nothing but opportunity, not one downside to anything, other than the bitterness of the Cuban Americans in this country who just don't want any progress to happen as long as the Castros are in power.
Okay. What do you imagine that the United States wants to get out of this? I guess that a lot of different answers to that, depending on who you're talking about.
Well, I think what the American citizens want to get out of is this country can't believe, people can't believe this. They think you can't go to Cuba because Cuba won't let you go. You can't go to Cuba because our government won't allow you to go. It's our policies that have isolated Cuba, not Cuban policies. So, I think what the American people want to see is this travel embargo lifted. Certainly the trade people in agriculture, and California being the #1 ag state, would love to see agricultural trade normalized. Cuba isn't a big country and certainly has no money. It's not going to be like, oh my God, you're opening up a huge trading market. People don't like to be told that they can't trade, they can't travel, they can't have interactions with other countries. Our government does not prohibit you from going to North Korea or Iran. Those governments may not want you, may not let you in, but our government doesn't tell you you can't go. We do that for Cuba. So I think that there's the curiosity, discovery. I mean, everybody in this room, as you're here tonight, because you've either been to Cuba or you want to go, and now you want to know some more about the politics. It's going to be slow in Washington. We have a really new control of both the House and the Senate, and it's a real hardline group. It's strong on defense, weak on diplomacy, very penalistic. Want to penalize not only poor people in this country, but countries that don't agree with their philosophy. So I think change is going to be a lot slower than we are anticipating, unless the American people, you, the voters, can really show these legislators that we don't like this just say no policy anymore. You've got to start opening doors and normalizing things. And that's pressure is going to come from merchants who want to trade, from tour operators who want to form tours, and the list goes on and on.
Okay. What do you think that Cuba wants from this change?
Well, that's a good question, Jan, and I think that's very difficult because Cuba, frankly, has been able to use the American embargoes as an excuse for why their government isn't doing things, and I think it's going to be a lot harder on them. It's very easy for what we want to do. It's just normalize our daily lives as far as the way we treat Canada and Mexico and all the other countries in the hemisphere. But I think Cubans, to get this adjustment, they're gonna turn that spigot on very slowly. They don't want hordes of Americans showing up in Cuba. That's why you just can't sign up for a tour. You can't go there on a tour ship. You can't go there in big, massive tours because they want to control the inflow. And I think they will control the inflow on a lot of things that will be frustrating for us.
What about trade implications for both sides?
Well, Cuba has to import almost everything because it's an island economy, just like Hawaii has to. And what Cubans have been very clever at, because they're well educated, I mean, you really see what the socialist, communist government has done in providing universal access to health care, universal access to education. almost 100% literacy in the country, one of the lowest low birth rate statistics in the world, training thousands of doctors. What was the question?
Just about trade. What would be
trade.
the
So
advantages
we've
or
been
disadvantages for
trading.
both sides?
They have to buy everything. It's interesting because one of the dinners that I had with Fidel Castro was with a trade group from California, wine growers and wine grape growers and wineries, and we had the lobbyists for the California Chicken Council, which we have, we're a big poultry state. So Castro engaged with the lobbyists. He said, we will buy chicken from you. We eat chicken, it's the main staple in our diet, because we find that we cannot raise chickens cost effectively like other countries can, because we have to import all of the food, import all the chickens, all the medicine for them, everything you have to do, we don't manufacture on the island, so we have to pay for it. And therefore you've been able, and other countries been able to export your chickens cheaper than we can raise them here. So we're buying all our chickens from Brazil because, and then he went into the chicken feed. I was just shocked to hear the president talking. He talked about the percentage of nitrogen, calcium, all these things that were in chicken food that they gave their chickens in Brazil, because that's why they decided to buy their chickens. So he turned to the representative from the California. He says, "What is the ingredients? What do you call the components of your chicken feed in California?" And the guy looked at him. He said, "Mr. President, I have no idea." He said, "You're the head of the chicken council, and you don't even know what you feed your chicken?" So he said, "But if they're really good quality nutrition and they beat the Brazilian price, we'll buy them." But the problem is with the Helms-Burton embargo is that unlike any other trade, they have to pay cash in dollars before those chickens leave the United States. And usually, it's cash on delivery, not cash when you send it. So, and they can't charge it, they can't do bills of ladling like they do in normal trade business. So we've made it extremely difficult. We still do sell products to Cuba, but this now that we're going to normalize banking relationships, some trade relationships, we will hopefully open up more markets for American agriculture.
One assumes there will be a lot of negotiations going on. What would you say are the non-negotiable points on each side?
Well, I think it's human rights for the United States. Cubans still very oppressive about dissidents. It'll be interesting, this challenge in Panama next weekend. I think it's going to be Friday or Saturday morning. And Raul Castro is supposed to be present too. And in that audience, I've asked at least that we not just listen to the anti-embargo people, but we listen, to the, the nationalists who don't want to see change, because they're going to be there with anger. But we're going to have this dialogue, sort of a town hall meeting, that we get the people that are very supportive of the change and that really have a mixture like you would in any meeting, a town hall meeting here in the United States. So we'll see. I think human rights without it, it's going to be most difficult for them, and it's going to be, we're going to insist upon it.
Okay. Now, in the questions that I have been given for you, we have just reached the part where we go into Latin America more generally. So the first question I have here about that is, what role did Venezuela and other Latin American countries play in the thaw of U.S.-Cuban relations?
Wow, that's an interesting question, and I haven't really heard it asked, nor have I heard a discussion on it, but my own take on it is that with the turmoil that Venezuela has had, they have been the big brother. When the Russians pulled out of Cuba, it wasn't cost effective for Russia to try to sustain stabilize, to aid this country that didn't really have anything to do with Russian security or Russian economics. Just got too expensive. But Venezuela, obviously, for the philosophy, the language, the proximity, stepped in, and Chavez was just, in love with Castro. He was a mentor. So they were subsidizing all the oil for Cuba. They were just totally dependent on Cuba just totally dependent on Venezuela for all the sort of big stuff they needed. With the turmoil in Venezuela, all of a sudden Cuba didn't have anybody to turn to. I think it weakened them. Because now they realize that we've got a lot of interplay with the United States on if Cuba has been looking for oil. They thought they were going to have this big rich oil find, and I guess it didn't pan out very well. But they went and had an oil rig built in China. It was very interesting, sort of the underground diplomacy that goes on when that rig came to Cuba, since it's in international waters, which we share, because each country has 200-mile exclusive economic zone. Well, the distance between southern Florida and Cuba is 90 miles, so obviously we share right up to their shoreline and there's to ours, and so, and although we've never worked out any trade agreements or had any boundaries actually determined when that oil rig was going to go into the channels, or I guess it was going on the other side. But anyway, we had, because we were worried about the spills and stuff, we had our inspectors through EPA go down to, I think they brought it into Trinidad, the Chinese rig, and European offshore drillers, they all inspected the rig to see it was, well made and everything like that. So we've been at least paying attention to their economic development, but I was at a conference in Cartagena, Colombia, and President Santos, who's a good friend, asked us to come over to, he has the president of Colombia has a summer sort of a Camp David in Cartagena, and invited all of us Congress members over there for lunch. And he mentioned to us, it was all off the record, and was sort of, we didn't plan to have, when we went there, we didn't know we were going to meet with him and have lunch, so it was just while we were there, by the way, the president wants you to come over for lunch if you're interested. And he just told us, he said, now that Venezuela has slipped, you'd be very wise to start softening your relationship with Cuba, because they have no place to go. And Bob Melendez, Senator Menendez, was there independently. He showed up, very surprised. We didn't know he was in Cartagena, and he shows up. And he was listening to all this, obviously not very comfortably. But a lot of us went back from that thinking we hadn't even thought about it. I mean, Congress doesn't spend a lot of time thinking about other countries in the world, believe it or not. I mean, if we have troops there and spend a lot of money, then we're going to be very interested in it. But I never finished, but when I went to Congress and found that the Latino caucus wasn't really interested in Latin America, because when they had chances of, you want to go to Europe, Codels to Europe or to Middle East, everybody wanted there. And you go to have a Codel to Latin America, nobody wanted to go. I said, my God, don't you want to go see Argentina and Chile and Peru? And so I just kind of started showing an interest in it, and then I sponsored workshops called, for the last summit, the summit was held in Cartagena, and I did a lecture series for about 6 months leading up to that with my staff and all the scholars from the Congressional Office of Research and from all the different foundations around town and academic strengths, called Roadmap to Cartagena, which was just to inform people of what was going on in Latin America. And now we've done the same thing, Roadmap to Panama. And as I said, I'll be going to that summit. The last two times I went with Barack Obama, with President Obama. This time he's going to Trinidad and to Haiti and he's not taking any Congress members with him, so I don't get a free ride on Air Force One. Got to go fly Copa Airline.
I'm sorry about that. I am glad you're going to Panama, but I'm sorry about that. All right, let's see. Do you see any movement toward the restoration of the free trade area of the Americas, or a new push in that direction?
Yeah, no, I think we have to, maybe after we lift the Helms-Burton embargoes, but until we do that, I don't think we have the votes in Congress to do it right now. I mean, we'll try to, we have a lot of bills introduced, and I'll co-sponsor them, and but a lot of interesting things going on here. With the indictment of Senator Menendez, who's been the Democrat, who's been the ranking member since Kerry left, on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, he has all the power just to block anything that would be contrary to his liking. He also has the ability to impose restrictions on things that we wouldn't like. So I think and now that he's indicted, and what's that going to do to his position? I think he's resigned as, this happened, we've been out of Congress for a week, so I think this happened while we were gone. And I think I remember reading that he's resigned his position as ranking member on that committee. So does that take him out of action? I don't think, he's still going to be a member of the Senate, and only the Senate can disqualify him. He could even go to jail and serve in the Senate, but nobody's ever done that. I think they resign before they go to jail, but I don't know what's going to happen to him. He's going to fight that, and he'll be a senator for as long as he's a senator. And will he continue that lifelong battle that he's always had in trying to not improve relations with Cuba? So I think that the trade agreement we have a lot of pressure from governors, Republican governors in this country, from Republican farmers who want to trade Cuba, certainly the travel interest. There's a really strong business lobby that want to normalize, but whether we can get the votes in Congress to lift it, I'd like to just get rid of Middlebury and repeal it. So we'll probably do stuff incrementally, small steps. I can't even tell you which ones would be the first steps we'll take.
Thanks. Well, do you see the United States as dependent on some of the Latin American mineral resources?
Yeah, our number one importer of oil is Venezuela. It's not the Middle East. I mean, all of the Middle East probably, but there's no, that's, of a single country, we get more oil from Venezuela than any other country. It's very interesting that I think that one of the issues I've been trying to push at these summits, and not just me, one person doesn't push issues, but to develop an energy policy for this hemisphere. I've always felt that politically, no matter whether you were a hardline or a lefty or right, or socialist or whatever your political philosophy, all of these countries have resources that they convert into producing electricity, electrons. And wouldn't it be incredible to have a superhighway of a grid that would go from Alaska to Tierra del Fuego, that every country could input their electrons whatever way they produce them. In Venezuela it'd be oil, and Nicaragua and Costa Rica it might be geothermal, or Brazil would be hydro, California would be solar, wind, and everything else. And you could bring down the cost of energy because we wouldn't have to import it from the Middle East at all. And we would have the cheapest energy of any hemisphere. And we could use those savings to invest in eliminating the root causes of poverty and really have a prosperous hemisphere. And I think that the countries are now committed to realizing that poverty is what's bringing them down and keeping them out of really successful development. I mean, Mexico has got about the 15th largest GDP in the world, and yet still burdened by the incredible poverty that they have in that country. And they realize that they've got to deal with those root causes and done it in a very successful way with conditional cash transfers. If some of you students haven't studied that, I'm trying to get our country to implement conditional cash. What they do, Mexico invented it, Chile improved it, and Brazil perfected it. And what they do is they give people in poverty on an individual basis, depending on what their situation is. If you don't know how to read and write, we pay you to learn to read and write. If you're a mom trying to raise young kids, we pay you to have those kids in school. And when that kid becomes a teenager, we give part of that payment to the child to stay in school. And it's really had this, where it was really effective is in Brazil, because Brazil was able to move about 4 million people out of poverty into lower middle class, who all of a sudden started buying appliances, renting apartments, and doing things that people do when they have some income. And it just, you know, made the economy of Brazil grow very rapidly. And it had the benefit of now having people who were literate and had some job skills and could compete in the economy. And it seems to me that we ought to be doing things like we've got the tools to solve the problems of this hemisphere in this hemisphere. And we have a lot of incredibly bright minds and capabilities, and look what Cuba's been able to do in advancing rural healthcare, in clinical care. Not big fancy machines, they don't have the money for that. But how do you just deal with people in clinics in that basic entry-level medicine where everybody has access to a doctor? We could do that in the United States. Learn from Cuba. Cuba's now on contract with Brazil, I think, to produce 1,000 doctors for Brazil, because Brazil has a goal of having a doctor in every village in Brazil. Well, what an incredible goal. We don't have that in America. We don't even have that in Monterey County.
Boy, so much to learn from Latin America now. It really is. Okay, the next question is, for much of the 20th century, Latin America was under the sphere of influence of the United States. What role is the United States likely to play now in that region over the last decade that has become more independent and self-aware, that is drawn together on many issues?
Well, I think obviously our interests are in trading partners. And security. You know, if you think about it, NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, which was Canada, the United States, and Mexico, to create that concept that those three countries would be in unison, we would remove trade barriers so goods could flow either way without tariffs. And what we ought to do is carry it on to, I mean, I would love to see us invest so heavily, or help Mexico invest so heavily in itself that you could tear down the fence. We don't, you know, and tear it down with Canada. Vicente Fox said something to me that I thought was really interesting, because I've never heard it discussed in our plans, but he said, you know, if you look at the United States and Canada, you have aging populations. Those aging populations are going to demand a lot of labor force. As you get elderly, you're going to need a lot of long-term care and other kinds of nursing facilities. On the contrast, Mexico, majority of the people are under, I don't know, was 25 years old. And he said, we could be developing that workforce for North America, for Canada and the United States. We could be teaching them the skills they needed to give that care. And we could be the employment force for the future that you won't be able to provide in your own country. And that the concept of thinking regionally and thinking strategically, I also think that we ought to look at Mexico as our border, our perimeter security. I mean, if bad terrorists land in Mexico and they want to get to the United States, they probably can. If we really help Mexico become as secure as we want it to be, and share intelligence and share all kinds of things, we would have that perimeter secured. And Canada is the same thing. You know, that people talk about who don't want immigration policy and who want to strengthen the border don't realize that the intel is of people that have gotten into this country with bad things or bad people with bad backgrounds have not come across the Mexican-American border. They've come across the U.S.-Canadian border. So there's more bad activity coming south than going north, than coming from Canada than coming from Mexico. But we don't think that way. We have to think that, you know, Mexico's a poor country, and we've got to have all these, we got to keep our guard up. But anyway, and here we are sitting in a city called Monterey. Seems here they were here a long time, you know.
Do you see the United States as benefiting from renewal or enhancement of ties with Latin America generally? And do you see advantages in Latin America?
I don't think the United States Congress, and I don't think most Americans give a damn about Latin America. They just don't. I mean, they want to go to Peru and see Machu Picchu. I think the World Cup probably was the first time people, well, they were Rio de Janeiro, but you know, the first time anybody realized how big this country was, Brazil, as big as the United States almost, and so diverse. But I find it frustrating in Congress. It's just not a lot. There's not a lot of interest. I don't know why. I mean, our heritage is from Latin America, particularly here in the Western United States. But we didn't get taught that when we were in school. We got taught all about the Pilgrims. You know, that's where it all started. Fact is, the Presidio right here behind us is the longest continuously operating military base in the United States. It ain't something on the East Coast where the revolution was fought and everything else. It's right here in Monterey.
Yeah.
So, you know, we've got all this history and culture that is all South Latin origin, and yet we don't even, we don't study it in school, we don't practice it in wanting to be curious. Colombia, which I'm very excited about. Colombia, when they open up their coffee country, you're gonna say, well, did you ever go to Italy and all that, Tuscany and all that beautiful area? Where do you see Colombia and the coffee regions? It's gonna be as pretty and as exciting to visit. They're starting to do coffee tasting just like we do wine tasting. So it'll be really kind of cool, and you can ride horseback and mules in those mountains, and it's just a beautiful country, beautiful people, music, culture, food.
Yeah.
But if you tell people you're going to do a tourist in Colombia, they think you're going to get assassinated. You know, so we have a long ways to go.
When they start doing the coffee tasting in Colombia, that's when I'm going to take a bunch of students down. This is really not Havana Club, it's coffee. All right. And what effect do you see the ongoing war on drugs as having on formal talks between the United States and Latin American countries?
Well, hopefully, that's a great question, because one of my trips to, when I went with you, Jan, when we went to Guatemala, I was in Havana for 2 days, and and dealt with the intersection there, the American office. You know, our sort of, I never know how to put those in terms, because it's essentially our embassy, but it just doesn't have the authorities and responsibilities of an embassy. But the fellow that was assigned there from the U.S. Coast Guard, can't wear his uniform in that country, asked me if I would go to an international drug conference with him in Havana. And I said, sure, I'd be just curious to go. So I went. It was, you know, a big conference, a big assembly room, people from all over Europe and Latin America. Our country had no official position. We weren't there. He was there just as an observer. But he was telling me, he said, you know, Cuba is phenomenal on drug introduction. They don't want interdiction. They do not want drugs on this island. And any intel they pick up, because it's a, you know, whole Caribbean is all transfer points, and said they will share it with us. And he said, the reason I want you there, he says, I can't be here in official capacity, but you're a member of Congress. I'm going to get you introduced, and I hope you'll get up and say something. So I, conference that I didn't even know existed, and I was there now as a keynote speaker, but I wasn't a keynote, it was just a greeting. But anyway, I was fascinated because I came back and said, well, why aren't we at these conferences? You know, Cuba also has a institute on sex. I think that's what they call it, Institute of Sexology. And it's, they have a huge family planning conference in Havana every year. And I came back and thought, well, why don't we get our Planned Parenthood organizations to go take a delegation? Because they're just, these are conferences that are very serious, very important to attend, and there's just no American presence. So I think what's going to happen is that normal society, we call regular order, as we say, when things happen normally, that'll really open up opportunities for America to be engaged, and whenever there's engagement, there's counter-engagement. I'm hoping this institute, Monterey Institute, perhaps with Cal State Monterey Bay, the two of them, can create an academic exchange program so students could just flow freely as they do from other countries here to a year abroad and come to the Monterey Peninsula. They love California. Don't they love California as people all over the world do, but Cubans too. They know a lot about Florida and the East Coast. They don't know a lot about California. It's been impossible to get here. So I think there's just incredible opportunities that aren't going to come about because Congress does something. I think it's going to just happen people to people, institution to institution, and little by little, as we call it, the tipping point will come, which will force the politics in Washington to act accordingly.
I think maybe you just answered the next question too, but maybe you'll have something else to add to it. Do we have to look far for a new U.S.-Latin American relationship? Will the structural or policy changes now underway accommodate new challenges and opportunities, or are the changes likely to be more subtle?
Well, I think that the changes are not subtle. The president's speaking almost instantaneously at the same time to these countries, essentially headed towards total normalization, is unprecedented. I mean, it's interesting because when at the last summit, the pressure was the United States, if you don't allow Cuba to come to the next Senate, we're going to invite Cuba. Like it or not. And what it would have done if we hadn't changed, the president hadn't changed his policy, he would have had to boycott the summit. And that would have been shocking to not have a presence there. So, I think his timing was all about trying to lead up to this weekend. And but I think it's going to take what the presidents have agreed to, and the diplomacy they've started in these agreements is going to take a lot longer than people thought. Not all because of our problems in Helmsburg, some of it because they said the Cubans aren't going to be interested in making huge changes very quickly either. So what's going to happen is, and it can happen in this room, is you all ought to go. Now you can't just go down and call up your travel agent and say, hey, book me but it won't be impossible to go. You'll just have to find a licensure. Now we're going to just issue one general license. There's about 12 categories in that general license, and academic exchange, culture exchange, artist exchange, whatever it is. Find something there that you want to do and work with a licensed entity, and then you can go, and hopefully bring some Cubans back.
Yeah, good idea. I think we're going to skip the last few questions because we have a pile of new ones from the audience now. So, and I'm going to have to put on my glasses to read this. Okay. What is the significance of issues related to Guantanamo in U.S.-Cuban relations?
Well, Cuba doesn't like the fact that we have a everlasting, I guess, non-ending expiration lease of Guantanamo. We can be there as long as we want. We send them a rental check every month, and they've never cashed it. President Obama would like to shut down the prisoner of war camp in Guantanamo. I think the hardliners will always want to keep that base. I've actually just landed in the little tiny airport that they have for the military there. I haven't been to the prisoner of war camp. But it's not cost effective for us to have that camp there. It's multi-millions of dollars per detainee. We would love to just shift all of them to states, to federal prisons in the United States and try their cases or release them. But the hardliners in Congress have prevented the president from doing that. So it is here to stay, and I don't think you're going to see any immediate drastic changes in it.
Yeah. Okay. Are there lessons from the experience with Cuba that can be applied to other situations, such as relations with Iran?
Oh, yeah, but that's just a whole different, that in its own right is all its complications. Yes, it's this thawing of hardline diplomacy which we've demonstrated now with Cuba, obviously can be with other countries, but it's a two-way street. I can't see the North Koreans wanting to open up North Korea to American tourists and everybody else. I don't think they're going to negotiate that. So you've got to have both sides wanting this. As I said, Cuba didn't have any place to turn. I think they had realized that without Venezuela as their big godfather, financial godfather, that they were losing that. They need some help. They just can't make it on their own economy with the desire. Now you've educated all these people. They have access to television, internet, although it's clandestine. They know what's going on in the world. And, doctors in Cuba, when I went there, I think when you and I were there, I think they got paid about $19 a month. They've just increased that to $40 a month because they were losing so many doctors who just went to do foreign, service abroad and then wouldn't come back. So Cuba's trying to hang on to its professional society, and they know they need this normalized relations with the United States. So I don't see these other countries necessarily wanting to do all that yet. Hopefully Iran, that's pretty exciting. That's even a bigger deal because that's a nuclear bomb deal, and then you can't get any bigger than that.
Right. But it sure seemed like all the people on the street wanted better relations. A couple of weeks ago. Okay, let's see. Will Senator Corker's bill reference the Iranian nuclear negotiations, also in the end affect the negotiations with Cuba? If so, how? Do you support the bill in its current state?
Whose bill is that?
Senator Corker's from Tennessee.
I haven't seen it. I don't know what it is.
I think it's just a bill to demand that the Congress have a role in the outcome of the negotiations.
We'll have a role. Whether we like it or not, we'll inject ourselves even where we're not needed.
All right. how will the sugar lobby impact or thwart this warming of relations with Cuba?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, I know about the sugar lobby in the United States, and we've had what we do in this country. We got to understand big agriculture. We have what we call a commodity program in the United States, which was essentially a way of securing our basic commodities: wheat, corn, rice, beans, and cotton. And the reason the federal government stepped in and guaranteed payments for these crops, if the market went down, if the market's strong, then we don't have to pay anything. But if the market gets weak, we pay the difference between what was the established price. Sugar is different. What we do is we charge more for sugar in the United States. We set the consumer, essentially the consumer price, which is the highest price for sugar in the world. And that's to protect our sugar interests. And you hear a lot about that and criticism of it, because the candy lobby, who uses sugar, doesn't like the fact that they have to pay more for sugar in this country than other countries around their competitors making candy. So it's really a fight between the farmers and the candy manufacturers, and the farmers have more votes in Congress than the candy manufacturers. So we've sustained it. Now Cuba comes in, and part of our price is the way we've given indirect foreign aid to Caribbean countries who are all sugar growing countries, is that we've allowed them to sell us their sugar at our, at this price. We include them in Central American countries. It's good for them. Now Cuba's in that. Now, do they get this benefit? I don't know. But at the same time, Cuba's trying to move away from a sugar economy, because it is the most grown agricultural product in the world. And the markets are always flooded and the prices are always dirt cheap. So why would you want to hang on to an economy that is so uncertain and so much competition from any other country that has sugarcane climate, microclimate? So as they move away, but they can't because they're still an agrarian country, I don't know. I'd love to, if somebody knows an answer to that question. I should know it because I'm ranking member on the Agriculture Appropriations Committee, but I'll go back and study that. Thank you.
Okay. You really have to be an expert on absolutely everything in the Congress, right? All right. Let's see. Any comments on Cuba's inclusion in the state as a state sponsor of terrorism list?
That's a good question, because that's the key hang-up. We want to normalize our diplomatic relationship with Cuba, and Cuba says, you're not even going to talk to us until you take us off this cockamamie list that you've created of countries that are state sponsors of terrorism. We don't sponsor terrorism in any way, shape, or form, and we should have never been on that list, and most of us in Congress agree. But the president has asked the State Department to essentially review the conditionalities which put them on that list and determine whether those conditions still exist, and if not, then to remove them or recommend they be removed from the list. And I think the president's going to do that tomorrow or before the summit, because I can't, although the review process takes 60 days, so I don't know. I mean, I think they're going to be taken off. We can't have done this. I mean, you can see they're not going to talk to us at all as long as we're going to keep them on that list, and they shouldn't be there. There's no factual basis for keeping them there.
I'm just amazed that they haven't dropped them off already, because I understand that Obama took Iran off the terror list while I was there a couple of weeks ago.
Really?
Yes.
I didn't know that.
That's what the Iranians were really excited about at that time, yeah. Amazing. Okay. In opening relations with Cuba, will there be a demand from the United States for Cuba to privatize property and take other neoliberal conditions?
No, not in that sense. I mean, we have normal relationships with Vietnam. They're a communist country. We don't insist that they private or the Soviet Union or any of the other countries that are have a different regime. But I think what we will require is a conditionality, that there at least be some kind of ability to proceed in court in some kind of judicial fashion. I think the Cubans win in that, but I think we have to at least allow for dispute resolution, to have a process for dispute resolution. So we'll probably insist upon it, but whether it'll allow people to get their houses back. You know what's fascinating about these houses, and I mean, even when I was in the Peace Corps in a very poor barrio, I never saw the living conditions like I've seen in Havana. I mean, you are living in the room that you were assigned in 1969, and you've now had children in that room. They're living with you, and now you have grandchildren living with you. It is really, I mean, and they're not building a lot of new buildings. So it's just, these apartment buildings are just so overcrowded, beyond anyone's imagination. And you can hear every noise of any apartment of any kind, from sadness to laughter to anything. There's no privacy, no intimacy, nothing that isn't shared with the whole building. And it's shocking. Now, I don't know how you're going to give those back to somebody who's been living in Florida, saying, oh, you can have that house back, and everybody else has to go on the street. There's just, I don't know how it can happen.
No, I don't either. Okay, this says, Brazil has financed a new port. I assume they mean for Cuba. Who is going to be the main beneficiary of this new port in Cuba? And then how do you think such infrastructure projects will affect U.S.-Cuban trade relations in the future?
Well, I think that the port they're building in Havana is probably the largest industrial project that Cuba's ever undertaken. And it is very exciting to be a sort of a planned community around a gigantic industrial port with all kinds of new living situations and working situations. The amount of money it's taking and the amount of development they're doing, you end up thinking, how are they going to ever get their money back? I mean, how are they going to get a return on this investment? Because I just don't see that port becoming as big as the Cubans or the Brazilians think it will. So I hope that they don't stop it in the middle and just sort of leave it hanging. It's an exciting project and one worth studying.
Okay. Is Cuba ready for microcredit?
Sure, I think so. I don't know enough about microcredit to speak on that with any knowledge.
That's got to be Jerry's question. Okay. In beginning trade with Cuba, what could the U.S. do to encourage freedom of speech, fair commercial law, democracy, and the rule of law?
Well, Cuba claims that they have a rule of law on trade and investment, foreign investment. But since they've adopted this law, nobody's been investing in it, and everybody's saying your law is weak, it's not very good. They think it's professional, state of the art. I think the marketplace is proving that they're wrong. So they have a lot of work to do in that area. But we are obviously, if we're going to try to normalize, when we think about the word normalize relations, you're allowed to do all these things. So Cuba has the know-how. They're smart people, and they're trained, and they know how to. But and and they've been dealing with other countries, so they have had normalized relationships. The trouble is that our embargo penalizes any country that does business with the United States that might think of doing business with Cuba. And that's why so much of the trade is, the embargo has hurt Cuba, because most companies would say, look, the United States is a giant client. This island with limited disposable income is very small and just not worth the effort to jeopardize legal status with the United States. So we don't want to get into courts in this country, and we don't want to be pursued diplomatically in all the avenues that one can have. But this is going to have to change. So lifting this embargo will, then all these other countries and their businesses will be working with Cuba to try to have international standards for all of the things that were mentioned in that question.
Okay. Will there be any new or additional money laundering vulnerabilities as banking relationships are normalized?
I'm sure there will be, as people take advantage of whatever loopholes or gaps are there, but I think I don't see how it would be any different than worries about money laundering in other countries, because they'll have to sign disclosure and allow inquiries to be pursued. I don't know how one could sort of hide money in Cuba. Some of the Caribbean islands do a pretty good job of that. I don't think Cuba wants to go there. I don't think their government's interested in that.
Yeah. Okay. Will the stabilization of relations lead to closure of Guantanamo?
Hopefully, but I don't see it happening.
Wouldn't that be nice, yeah? Oh, boy. Okay, let's see. Will you please do everything you can to stop TPP, including stopping fast track?
Well, I just was approached by labor and environmental groups, and I told them, I said, look, you want us to stop, you just want us to proclaim right now that we would not support a TPP, which is the sort of the parliamentary negotiating process that you adopt prior to the trade agreements. You negotiate each of these agreements, commodity or it's specific, wheat in sort of a bilateral, we're going to sell wheat to each other, whatever, chickens or gold or whatever it is. And we have not, in Congress, we've been acting really tough requirements for the administration on labor and environment, which is where these groups are really organized, and feeling that they won't be tough standards. And I'm saying, don't make us declare now before we've even seen the agreement. That's so unintellectual and so unprofessional. But if it screws labor and environment, my background's strong in both of those fields, and I won't support it.
Yeah, good.
But I want to see what it looks like before I cast a vote.
Yeah. All right, let's see. Economically speaking, how will the opening of U.S.-Cuban diplomatic ties and banking affect U.S. relations with other Latin American countries and organizations?
Well, I can't think of it. I mean, I don't know a lot about banking issues, but I can't think of doing anything but good. I mean, you can't do normal banking functions with Cuba right now. There is no, it just doesn't exist. When I've gone there, I've had to take American dollars, which you have to convert into Cuban kooks, as they call them. And there's actually two forms of Cuban money. There's a street money that essentially the people have, which is worthless outside of Cuba. And then there's this Cuban, and actually the exchange, I think, is higher than the dollar. I forget what it is now. Do you remember that? But
Yeah, I think so.
I think for $100 you get like 72 kooks.
Yeah, that's something.
And that's what you have to use in paying for anything. You can't use your credit card. You can't write a check in Cuba. You can't pay for your hotel room with a credit card.
Right. comment. This says, U.S. congressmen have been involved in complicity with Israel on the Iran deal. Do you think they are going to simply relax and allow such a close shift to follow through?
I don't know. I think the Iran deal has got to be a good deal. It's just got to be better than what we had, and I hope that Congress just doesn't screw it up. But there's a lot of pressure. Netanyahu isn't helping at all, and but he got elected with all his fear, and I don't know what we'll do. It'll be very interesting because it's not just how Congress feels. Remember, we're there in Congress because people have put us there, and the people that have put us there are the voice of America, and that voice is, the military voice of America. It's going to be the business voice. It's going to be the diplomatic voice. It's going to be people in academia all over this country who are all going to have, I think, a kind of a united voice saying this is a good deal. Let it stand. Work on it. And I don't know how members of Congress are going to be able to reject all of that wisdom.
What I was just about to tell him, answer this one, is travel to Cuba from the U.S. now permitted by the United States?
No. Except if you go under, before there were 13 licenses, you had specific categories. You had to go under that specific category. You had to qualify. What is your purpose? What is your professional credentials? What is it that makes you qualified to go? And now the American government is going to give what they call general licenses to people like Monterey Institute or to organizations, and you still, there's 12 categories, but you don't have to qualify under any one general category, any of those 12 areas. You can do it for exchanges and things like that. So you can't just, the point is, it's not like I'm going to Panama tomorrow night. I don't just call up my travel agent and say, book me to Panama and book me a hotel and all those things. You can't do that with Cuba yet. Eventually, that's when you lift all these embargoes and we lift the Helms-Burton, you'll be able to travel freely to Cuba, but not now and probably not for a while.
Okay, that's too bad. It may
Jan,
suddenly.
when you went, you went under license? How did you, from the school, or what did you?
No, the general license of Global Exchange.
Global Exchange.
Yeah, but we had in several years in the late 90s, we traveled under a license for the Institute. So maybe we'll get back to that. But anyway, I know that Sam has another engagement around 8 or needs to be out by 8. I wish we could keep him around here and treat him to some Havana Club and all that sort of thing, but I can't keep him forever. But I was saving this one question for last, seemed like the right one. And I got an instruction from Alex while you were gone that the question is, what is your fondest memory and experience from your travels in Cuba? And he's asked me to remind you about getting a painting from Castro.
I led a delegation with this nonprofit group, and I speak Spanish, so I went and when Fidel never listens. I mean, he never asks you a question. He just talks all the time. You can't even, if you can say something, you got to interrupt him. And he may respond or he may not. But anyway, he said, "Would you like to see my office?" And yeah, sure, I'd love to see your office. The president of a country gets invited to his office. Office, no windows. Wasn't a fancy office at all, except he had one big, huge, gigantic, before all these thin screen TVs, this was 10 years, 15 years ago. one big Sony television set, and then he had on the wall, he had a picture of Hemingway with Hemingway's world record Marlin, and a note from Fidel that he kept under that thing saying that it really wasn't a world record because it wasn't caught in Cuban waters. And then he said, by the way, he said, we had President Vicente Fox here a week ago, and I'd asked my staff to give him a gift of Cuban art. And he said, so here are all these paintings on the wall, he said, are all famous Cuban artists. He said, don't ask me any questions about them individually because I don't know a lot about art, but they're really good. And he said, would you like one? And I said, Mr. President, that would be wonderful, but I said, under the laws of Congress, I'm banned from receiving a gift, not because it's from you or from Cuba, but we can't receive any gift. And he said, yeah, but you could give it to a museum or a university. I said, yeah, I could do that. And so he said, how about this one? It's not like I got a choice. It was a huge painting, Jan. It was as high as one of the flags, and so high. And it looked like an exploding palm tree. It looked like somebody, like a palm tree, and then out of the center of it, like a 4th of July flare or something. It was strange.
I think I know the artist.
So I took it back from this ante room where he had all these. And he said, oh, but in the painting I really liked on the wall, he says, well, that's the one that Vicente Fox chose. I'm not a president, I don't get these things. So I took it back to my delegation. It was like, how are you going to get that home? I said, I don't know. So then I asked him, I said, he said, well, what hotel are you staying in? I said, I'm staying in such and such a hotel. And he said, I'll have it all boxed up for you tomorrow. I'll have it delivered. So sure enough, this huge box comes. Everybody said, how are you going to get that home? And I said, well, I'm going to get it home, and I'm going to give it to the University of California in my district. Because Santa Cruz had a really active Cuba group, the one that was in Guatemala. So we get back to the Miami airport. First of all, I had to get letters and everything. And then when I went through customs, the guy said, oh, art's exempt. You can bring as much art back from Cuba as you want. You just can't bring cigars and rum. But you can have art. We don't care what the value is. So when I get to the Miami airport, I'm schlepping this stuff, hauling it around in one of those little scooter things, those airport carts. This is heavy and everything like that. The minute we get on the American soil, they say, well, we have to decide what we're gonna do with this painting that belongs to us. I said, it doesn't belong to you. You gave it to me. I'm giving it to you. No. It's the American delegation. I just flipped these guys off and said, don't worry, I'm taking it home with me. And shifted out to UC Santa Cruz. And the irony is that there was a professor at UC Santa Cruz who had studied this Cuban artist. It's now hanging in the faculty room of UC Santa Cruz.
That's wonderful. I'll have to see it because I have a feeling from your description that I meant
I can't remember who the artist was. Look, my feeling is that American diplomacy is best when Americans just travel. We're good people, and we do a lot of good things. And people in Latin America, particularly Cuba, and especially Colombia, where they love Americans. And just keep pushing the envelope. Try to get there one way or another. And, squeaky wheels get the grease. Enough people say that in the United States, things will happen. The politics of change will have to occur. And we're getting good leadership out of the White House and out of the State Department. We just have to get some good fellowship from Congress.
Wonderful. Okay, Sam, I don't know how to thank you since we can't keep you around and entertain you for a while, but I really, really appreciate you doing this for us. And I hope we'll get you back here soon.
Get Jonathan to come and do one of these, and I'm going to read your book in the meantime, and I really appreciate you being a resident of our community.
Thank you.
And you've led, how many, you've done most of it, you've been leading tours with nonprofits, right?
Right. Close to 200.
You have I'd like to hear just your closing. You've heard this, what would you like to add?
Wow.
Just stand up and tell everybody.
Well, I think Congressman Farr has done a terrific job, and I subscribe to virtually all he has said. Cuba, thank you. Cuba is a friendly, welcoming environment. They love Americans, and there's no question that the normalization of relations, which Congressman Farr and his colleagues are going to have to propel, is going to improve the lives of people on both sides of the Florida Straits. Trade from this country to Cuba creates jobs. Cubans are well-educated, energetic, and will benefit from what they can provide to us. Thank you.
Just one more word, a hearty thanks for Sam. Let's have a